Good evening, everyone. We're just about ready to get started on our first edition of the Smitty Story Hour. Brett McLeod will take over shortly. I'm going to continue to admit guests in as they come to the waiting room. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them through chat. Please send them to everyone so we all know what questions are being asked, and Brett will get to your questions at the end of his presentation. We'll start in just a moment.
Crap, I just lost it. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Brett McLeod. I'm chair of the Forestry department here at Paul Smith College. I'm also a proud alum, and I have the pleasure of coaching the Paul Smith Woodsman's team. I should probably begin with a confession. I have a few problems. My first problem is that I was born about 100 years too late. And my second confession is that I'm a little bit of an axeholic or an axe junkie. My obsession with axes began when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my father used to bring me along with him to flea markets and barn sales, and I was always in the corner finding old rusty axes, and I've enjoyed taking many of those axes and bringing them from, as I like to say, from rusty to trusty. When I came to Paul Smith's as a student, I found my tribe, so to speak, and found a lot of other folks who just couldn't get enough of these old axes. And of course, the Woodsman's team was a great outlet for being able to actually use some of these antique axes, and also making the next step into competitive racing axes, and learning more about some of the finer elements of axe making, honing, sharpening, hanging, and all the rest. So I'm really happy that I've been able to work on this project, American Axe, the tool that shaped a continent, for the last couple of years or so. And this book wouldn't have been possible without the help of lots of folks. So Paul Smith College was the venue where many of the photos you'll recognize were taken. Many of the axes were part of the Paul Smith's Woodsman's team and Forestry Club collection, as well as many of my own. And then there were those folks who heard about the book and jumped in a big way. Brant and Cochran Axes up in Portland, Maine, actually is featured in the book, and we've partnered with them to make what we like to call the Paul Smith's Adirondacks, which is an axe that is made under the Paul Smith's label. So I'll go ahead and begin here. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about how this project came together, give folks a little bit of a background on the axes. I realize that we have both sort of certified axe junkies on this evening's Zoom conference, but also folks that are just kind of curious about all this, and seen a lot of alums, former students chime in tonight and jump on this Zoom call. So thanks for joining us. So, you know, the axe is an interesting tool. It is as simple as they get. It is a wedge with an edge. And there's something about that simplicity that's really captured my attention. And as a forester, the fact that nearly 300 million acres have been cleared with this tool across the country throughout history is a pretty amazing feat. So it's my love of forest, it's my love of simple old tools, and a love of history that brought me to this book. The axe family. So just want to make sure everyone's familiar with the members of the axe family. And so I'm sharing with you some of the pages, the actual pages from American Axe tonight. And so you can see the axe family is made up of, well, quite a few members, the smallest of which is the hatchet. And the main feature that distinguishes a hatchet from a boy's axe or a felling axe is that it's a one-handed tool. The boy's axe is typically about 2.5 pounds, 2 3/4 pounds on the larger end, 28-inch handle. And then the felling axe is the axe that everyone always thinks of when they think of Paul Bunyan, typically a 31 to 36-inch handle, 3.5 to 5 or 6 pound head on them. Some other cousins within the axe family would include things like the adze, which has the blade perpendicular to that of an axe and is largely a scraping tool, but was specialized for cooperage, barrel making, and was used for a little finer work on things like floorboards, mantles, that sort of thing. The maul is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. It's not a chopping tool, but instead a splitting tool, so going in line with the grain as opposed to diagonally. And then we have a throwing axe. And lumberjack sports as we know them today are really something that emerged much like rodeo did, out of the work that the men did. But back in the logging camps, they needed a little bit of entertainment, and that's where the throwing axe really came in. They'd often throw for a pint of whiskey or outhouse cleaning duties and that sort of thing. And so there's certain axes that make for particularly good throwing. In addition to being well balanced, we look for that symmetrical pattern that we call the bow tie. There's also some axes that are maybe you might have seen featured in movies because they're big and impressive. Things like the broad axe is always used inappropriately in movies as a murder weapon, but in actuality, it has the ability to take off large slabs of wood and create a long, continuous, flat plane. In the center, you see the racing axe, which is what we all use on the Paul Smith's Woodsman's team. This particular one is by a new company called Vermont Racing Axes. And then a hobby that's really taken off in the last few years is the modified axe division. These are sort of, think about taking a stock car and turning it into a hot rod, where folks take an old axe and modify it. So this gives you an idea of sort of some of the members of the axe family. Some of the other ones that are featured in the book include, if we can move on down here, oh yes, of course, the Shining with the fire axe, the Pulaski on the fire lines, with essentially an adze on the end, and more specialized axes like a butcher's axe. This one was kind of neat. I found it up in Maine, and it was used by a butcher with a meat tenderizer on one end of it. So pretty neat stuff. The evolution of the axe in America is also pretty interesting. We start out with an axe that came from Europe and was used, the small ones were used primarily for trade hatchets. And you'll notice that both on the trade hatchets and the English felling axes, they lack steel at what we call the pole end, so the pole or the back of the axe. And when you try to swing an axe that doesn't have much of a pole to it, it wanders through the air. It doesn't travel in a very true direction. And so when they arrived in the New World, discovered that the timber was larger and the tasks at hand required a little bit more of a substantial axe. And so we see an evolution here where we get these large, heavy poles that extend beyond the back of the axe and allow the axe to penetrate not just in sort of a straight line, but also hit with a little bit more power. And then somewhere around 1750, we start to see the first of the curved handled axes. The European axes prior to that had all been straight handled axes. So those were some of the early days of axes in this country. The actual felling methods have been modified a little bit over time for racing and that sort of thing. But the reality is that it's all about precision or repeatability, being able to hit the same spot over and over again. So when we chop a log, we're trying to actually stack our hits, and those that were on the Paul Smith's Woodsman's team will probably recognize this clockwise pattern that we use, where we'd have an up hit at a 45-degree angle and then a down hit and move our way around the block. Now, this is a pretty efficient way to take down a tree. In this photo, I'm actually using a vintage axe. I'm using something called the Black Raven that comes in at about 3.5 pounds and has a pretty good edge on it. It's a 100-year-old axe, but it cuts just fine. The one shortcoming of the axe, there you see the 45-degree angle. The one shortcoming of the axe, though, is that as this tree starts to go over, there it is with just the hinge, and then heading towards the ground, we're left with a rather high stump. And it's the advent of the crosscut saw that ultimately allows us to combine both the axe to cut the notch and the crosscut saw for the back cut at ground level. As foresters will often tell you, there's 80% or more of the value of the tree is in the first log of the tree. And because of that, you're leaving a lot of value in the forest. So the axe was pretty good, but the crosscut saw helped things along quite a bit, especially once we started to rub up against some of the limitations of available forests. So there are quite a few different what we call axe patterns out there as well, and the one that people typically know, some of the patterns that are named for locations, things like the Jersey bit or the California reversible. And then we have axes that are double bitted or single bitted, and probably some of the more popular double bitted axes are these Michigan pattern axes, and then the bow tie axes that I showed you a little earlier. So let me flip over here to one of my favorites. This is a Marshall Wells handmade, and interestingly enough, this came out of a factory, and it probably came out of a factory somewhere based on those markings between 1892 and about 1915. And I think this axe is just beautiful, and I had a really great photographers that worked on the book with me and really captured the patina and the history and the lives of these axes through photos. And I've got to say, this particular axe, although it's not the most valuable axe or anything that I own, it is certainly one of my favorites. But Marshall Wells realized that the axe market was getting a little jammed up in the early 1900s, and they had all these factory axes they were pouring out. So they wanted to make people think that they were getting a handcrafted product. So they turned out a large number of these quote handmade axes, which today I think are pretty desirable. You'll notice that double bit pattern there. So 2 cutting edges, and I always get asked why 2 cutting edges. And the short answer is that one edge was kept to be rather fine. It was a sharp, thin edge that was used for what we'd call the clean work. And the other edge was used for the dirty work. If you had bark at the base of the tree that you needed to clear away to put your notch in or something like that, that would do the dirty work. Cutting limbs, for example, that are typically harder wood, the knots being harder, you'd use the not so pretty end or the other side of the axe for that sort of work. Here in the Adirondacks, a lot of folks put what looked like a single bit handle on these double bit axes. That became known as the Adirondacks handle, which they would orient it so the clean end was going towards the natural curve of the handle, made for a pretty powerful swing. And then when you flipped it over to the other side, you'd choke up on the handle, so it was much shorter above the curve, and do the dirty work with that. So the Marshall Wells handmade axe. Not all axes were for practical woods work. The axe was also certainly an American symbol, and if we look at things like the parade axes of some of the early fraternities. So this is one early American fraternity known as the Modern Woodsmen of America. And the axe you see there that they're holding and featured on the left there is a decorative cast aluminum axe. It weighs only about a pound for the whole thing. And they would use these in parades, much like batons, and the members were known as foresters. So I think that speaks a lot to sort of the history and the cultural impact that the axe has had in this country. Now, there's quite a few specialized axes as well that I ran across as I was working on this particular book. One of them that I had heard about, but I hadn't actually seen before, was what they call an undercutter's axe, or more colloquially is called a chainsaw axe. And a lot of people see this and they think, oh boy, that looks a lot like looks like a fireman's axe or something like that. But the adze or point on the back of it is a little bit different. And so it's actually used with early chainsaws. So in 1923, Andreas Steele comes up with a chainsaw, doesn't catch on until about the mid 30s, late 30s. And those early chainsaws, unfortunately, could not cut at an angle. They were very good at cutting perpendicular to the log, but they could not cut at an angle. So these undercutter chainsaw axes were used to make a series of horizontal cuts, and then you'd come back with the pick of the undercutter axe, and you could pry out the wedge. This created essentially a notch that allowed the tree to fall in a what I'll call a semi-controlled fashion. So fairly rare axe if you run across them. So do keep an eye out. The pick on the back is a little narrower than that of say a Pulaski or a Matic. It's a little closer view for you as well. One of the axes that seems to get a lot of playtime is the Plum Champion Axe. And this is the axe that really brought competitive wood chopping to America and formalized some of the competitions. The Fayette Plum Company of Philadelphia produced a huge number of axes, and they dominated the marketplace and were known for their particularly good advertising. And perhaps their best advertising tool of all time was a gentleman that we see here, Peter McLaren. And Peter McLaren was came from down under, he's from Australia, and he made his way to America and was known as a great wood chopper. And that's Peter that you see on the side of the axe there. These axes can go for several $100s in mint condition. This is one that I think I had $6 into at a yard sale, but you can see it's a chopper on top of a log, and it reads Plum Champion Axe. And Peter there's Peter right there. Peter would make his way from hardware store to hardware store and to country fairs, and he would challenge anyone out there to chop against him. And if you could beat Peter, you would get your very own Plum Racing Axe. Well, needless to say, not many people beat Peter, and that actually worked out fairly well because they ended up ultimately buying their own Plum Racing Axe. And so these Plum Champions or Plum Racing Axes, Peter actually literally wrote the first book on. There he is there, same image as on the side of the axe, and it's the axe manual of Peter McLaren. So quite a impressive historical figure. Very few instances of him actually losing any chopping competitions, and certainly did a pretty good job of selling axes for the Plum Axe Company. So one of the people always ask me, what are the most collectible axes, or what should I keep an eye out for? On the cover of the book, you saw the Black Raven axe, which was still is a highly desirable axe. It was a personal favorite of Gould Hoyt, who I know many of you had as a professor over the years, and it's just a gorgeous axe. Another one that's probably even more rare would be this one here. This is called the Lincoln Axe, appropriately, and I'll scroll down so you can see a close up of it. There we go. The Lincoln Axe actually has an etching on the side of Lincoln's face and somewhere around 25 words on it, and was used as a marketing tool because, oh, there we have the great Lincoln quote, "Give me 6 hours to chop a tree down and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." And what this axe did, sorry, I thought I had a closer up one of that, but I'll show you an actual Lincoln axe here in a little bit. The Lincoln axe was great because it was a tool that was marketed around being an honest tool, a hard-working tool. something that you could put your back into and it would pay you back all day long. So, so they did great marketing with these things. And the hardware companies were the ones that were really driving this. So you had actually a fairly limited number of axe makers, but they were making axes for all the major hardware companies and later on for the department stores. And they would put basically any etching you wanted on the sides of these axes to help move them along to the consumers. I'll move down here. I did mention there's the advertising was not restrained at all. OVB, meaning our very best axe. So they certainly weren't holding back. That's a later OVB axe. And the book goes through a variety of these collectible axes. Perhaps the rarest axe that I've come across would be what's known as the President's Axe. And this is referring to the President's hunting axe, which you can see here. And this was an axe that was given to President Theodore Roosevelt in August of 1902. He was taking a train trip through Maine, stopped off in Waterville, Maine. And he was greeted by John King, who ran the King Axe Company. And John King had made a hunting axe for the president with a oak handle and a chestnut handle, oak axe handle, chestnut handle for the knife, and the knife screwed into a ferrule on the a brass ferrule on the bottom of the axe handle. On the back side of the or pole of the axe is a built-in nail puller, and President Roosevelt got back on the train, waved it above his head, and according to news reports, took the axe and enjoyed it the whole train ride, spending more time looking at his axe than out the window, and got back to Washington, D.C. and decided that he needed one for his son Kermit. So he actually ordered another one. The King Axe Company saw this as a marketing opportunity, and they decided to take advantage of this, and they made a few more as the Sportsman's Axe, which have some embossings on them and a few things that are different. But there's 5 axes out there today that are all possible contenders as TR's actual axe. This is the one I own one of these axes, and there's another one that was used for the book. So we don't know exactly which one it was, but they all have those early indicators that could have been TR's axe. I also wanted to share with you a couple others. We've got the let's see, moving on to we have some modern axes as well that we feature in the book, and modern axes include racing axes, as we use on the Woodsman's team and in competitive lumberjack sports competition. So there's one of our student athletes from the Woodsman's team. And also a whole series of axes that came out during our last axe renaissance of the 1970s that coincided with the oil embargo and high heating fuel prices and the resurgence of burning with firewood. So the Mountain Mall was one of those. Came out in the actually came out in the late 70s. They patented in the early 80s. It's quite a hunky looking thing here. It's about 6 pounds and it has a giant wedge on each end, very stout wedge, and that was the Mountain Mall. Also had other axes like the American Chopper that came out. The American Chopper is this tool here that you may have seen. It's kind of a clunky axe, and then it has these wings. So this is looking down the bit of the axe. You can see the wings. And the idea was that you strike the log, and then these wings pop out and cause the log to actually split. To anyone who's swung an axe very often, chances are if you try this, you'll just find it to be sort of a clunky excess. But nonetheless, it's kind of a neat little piece of engineering that goes back to the 1970s. And then finally, we have the racing axes. And I spend a lot of time honing axes and sharpening axes, grinding axes for the Paul Smith's Woodsman's team. And that includes axes that are from Australia, New Zealand, and now from America. So these are a couple racing axes. The one I wanted to highlight, or a couple of them here, is the Vermont Racing Axe. And then just below that is one that I'm particularly proud of. This is the Brown Racing Axe, made by Zach Brown, Paul Smith's alum. Zach, he's now in New York State DEC Environmental Conservation Officer, but he still swings an axe every now and again. But this axe was actually developed and used or made on a CNC machine and then finished by hand. So we can really dial in all the angles. This is what we would call a chisel. So you can see that final cutting edge. It's about an inch long, and then it's hand honed to a razor sharp edge. So this gives you an idea of sort of how axes have evolved over time. An axe like this is about $600, and that's about par for the course. Some axes go for as much as $800 in today's market. For competitive lumberjack sports. They're ground for different species, different moisture content, hardness of wood, all of that. So it's really become quite a specialized tool, considering that this all started with a chunk of steel and essentially a wedge with an edge. So those were some of the axes I wanted to share with you. I also do have, I'm in my office tonight, but I have a whole host of axes here. So if anyone has anything specific they want to see, I've got those as well. But I'll be happy to take questions from the chat, and anything's fair game. So you can fire away.
Can you hear me, Brett?
I can, yes.
Hey, this is Brad Robbins in Idaho Springs, Colorado.
How are you doing?
Good. So my son John tipped me off to your little presentation today. John Robbins?
Yes, yep.
Okay. So I'm John's dad, and I've got a pretty active interest in axes. Just a little background. I'm a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, one of the local restores, and in Evergreen, Colorado. And before I was a volunteer, I was a customer, and you wouldn't believe the number of axes that come in to, restores, and not so much Goodwill, but the restore takes everything. And before I got there, they were putting hatchets, axes, adze, half them come in without handles or half handles broken. And they would put them on a shelf for a couple weeks, then they'd throw them in the scrap pile. Well, when I started volunteering, I stopped that. So now I'm rescuing any type of edged carpentry tools that come into the place, really hand planes, axes, but it is pretty fascinating. And you do see some old axes coming in. I mean, you still have the run-of-the-mill stuff, the new India-made, some China stuff, but I would say predominantly, we see a lot of, or at least I see a lot of Collins, HSB, man, just a whole myriad. And I basically tune them up. And, I guess my kind of a roundabout way, as far as what is your treatment when you get a, just kind of a moderately rusted axe, pretty much covered, but not any deep pitting. I tend to give it a vinegar bath and then, you know, do a little really light brushing on it. And then I hone it.
Sure.
What do you recommend as far as remediation?
Yeah, it's those great comments and great questions. And it's always nice to hear that people are still finding vintage axes out there. eBay has been both you know, a wonderful thing and a horrible thing for axe collectors. Yeah, in the book I go through several different cleaning methods. Sometimes I do a vinegar bath, which is great, especially if you do a, you know, a light wire brush as it, you know, every day or two while it sits in the vinegar. Steel wool is great too. You just raw steel wool and a little bit of penetrating oil can be nice for cleaning them up. For axes that are a little further gone, I'll use a wire wheel.
Sure.
But it depends on the axe, its value, whether I'm trying to fix it up to be a user or if it's a truly collectible axe. The one thing is you can never put the metal back on an axe. And so I see people oftentimes, quote, restoring axes, and they'll grind away trying to get a chip out. And it's really unfortunate because when they're done, there's not much of an axe left. So I try to encourage people to adopt the less is more approach. So
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've really tried to not take too much off. If there isn't a lot of impact damage on the top around the eye, I just let that go. If there's mushrooming on the pull end and it's sharp, I will get rid of the sharp edges of the mushrooming. And that's about it.
Yeah, that's another area where people typically go too far, is they try to get rid of all the mushrooming. And, you know, I think the approach of just taking off the edges is probably a good one. I see there are a few other questions there about sharpening axes and when do the students still sharpen axes and that sort of thing. So it's no longer part of the first semester curriculum. Though all the members of the Woodsman's team have a chance to learn it and try it. And we actually got this last year, we set up the basement of the Forestry Club cabin so they can actually grind axes there. We use a large belt grinder is primarily how we do the rough work on it. I also have Hoyt's file sets and a handmade jig that he used to file the edges, and a filed edge is really nice. And you can do a really good job with a filed edge. There's also great diamond stones out these days, so we use diamond stones, hard Arkansas stones for the final edge as well. So yeah, there's been a lot of advances in sharpening. There's a lot of commercially available jigs now that have taken a lot of the guesswork out of it. But all students, they learn to tune up the axe. And I actually had one the other night, was using a chopping axe as a splitting axe, and it was in the dirt. So that particular student got a rather long lesson on axe restoration that night. So still part of it. I think there's a question about some of the Scandinavian axes and the Gransfors and the Holtzbrook and others, and they're exceptionally good axes. My experience is that the metal is maybe a little hard, but that allows you to file a particularly keen edge on them. I really like them. They're one of the few axes that I still see pop up on eBay, and people not know what they are. The HB, the Holtzbrook axe is one that still occasionally, they're the large felling axes you can get a good deal on. I also like that axe. It's a 6-pound head, so it's very heavy for if you need to pound a lot of wedges or something like that. It's pretty good. So another question about what was used to sharpen the axes. I know Hoyt had a variety of ways he sharpened axes. I know a lot of them were tuned up with what we call the hockey puck sharpener. So I have one of his old hockey pucks. Hard Arkansas stones as well. And then if there were chips or major grinding work that needed to be done, again, the file. So a lot of file work was done. Let's see, other questions? If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to take them. Also, any questions you have about the forestry department or program, I can answer those as well. Otherwise, I thank you all for joining us tonight. Let's see. So do you know what type of axe we used in 72, 74? I actually have a pretty good idea. That period of time, they used it was a high test axe. So it was they got a deal on, Hoyt got a deal, imagine that, on a whole bunch of these high test racing axes. And there was at one time over a dozen of them. And those were used throughout the 70s and 80s. There were also a few Aussie speed axes, which were made by Key Steel, early Aussie speed axes, but those were more early 80s for those. So most likely it would have been a high test axe. Most of those have gotten so short today that after multiple grindings and sharpenings, that we use them primarily as splitting axes now for the team.
Hey, Brett, great presentation. This is Chris Rommel. I'm a December 1996 graduate from the surveying program under Creighton Fee. Great man, had a great time at the school. Thanks for answering my question about the Scandinavian axes. I heard that there's no longer a surveying program at Paul Smith. Is that true? So
there's the associate's degree is being phased out. We just did not have the students for it. We have a minor in surveying that we're going to retain. So students that want that path will still have that. And then we're keeping the surveying classes in the forestry program as well. So they'll still have the 6 credits of surveying in forestry as well. So we are not actually removing it from our list of courses for the state. So if we figure out a way to rework the curriculum where we can attract more students, we'll be able to relaunch it. But we're currently on our last cohort of associate students for that.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. A couple of years ago, we started a recruiting program with the school, and my firm Wolpert. We started offering a scholarship, and unfortunately, it didn't really take off too much. But we did hire a gentleman, Frederick Petzold. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, Fred's great.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I love that kid. I shouldn't say that. Not a kid, but he's been with us a couple of years now, and he's doing a tremendous job. So yeah, I'm out in Denver, Colorado, and yeah, he was more than happy to move out, and like I said, doing a great job as a surveyor for us. So excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're, in many ways we've gone full circle. It was originally the forestry with the surveying option, and that's essentially what we're back to for these. And my goal is to try and to retain as many of the surveying courses as we can for these students. But
well, keep using that Trimble total sketch and
right.
Everything. I donated a couple of years ago. Yeah, be nice. It's one of those things we're seeing across the country. These programs, and trying to keep programs going and recruit more surveyors. So thank you. Excellent. Great presentation. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Right there. No. Okay.
So some questions about the book, and so that you can get the book at the college bookstore. They're shipping it. You can also get it, online at Amazon or any of the other folks that are selling it out there. It's looks like the first 25,000 copies have gone out. So excited about it. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I really appreciate you joining me this evening, and hope to see you all back at Paul Smith's on campus one of these days when things return to normal.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our first ever Smitty Story Hour. Thank you to Dr. Brett McLeod for joining us this evening and getting us started. And we will be broadcasting this. It's available, I hope tomorrow it'll be on our website. So if you missed something or you want to show a friend, it will be on our website, hopefully by tomorrow, if not by Monday in the afternoon, most likely. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.